Hello learners, today we are going to do a poem written by W.H. Auden. It's titled The Fall of Rome. It took Edward Gibbon nearly 20 years and 6 volumes to map the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. W.H. Auden, in his evocative poem The Fall of Rome, condensed the experience into just 28 lines. Auden's poem is like a mosaic of fragments, voices, and images of decline. He shows greatness disappearing piece by piece as a new world emerges. The poem makes the point that there is no one reason why empires fail. It makes us think about why those forces that generated such success, such wealth, such dominance seem to lose their potency and impact, and also why the points of the compass seem to have suddenly shifted, and that which once made us great becomes instead the source of our fall. Auden brilliantly depicts the forces of change that are gathering in the distance. Some will fall, others may renew, they may regenerate and endure. Many who were once visionary leaders failed at the time of great success to see the reality of inherent weaknesses and emerging threats. Today, they seem largely out of solutions. They challenge reality by attempting to use a power that no longer exists. Only the naive and those who are indifferent to reality could have failed to see the ominous signs a long time ago. Now, new vast herds seem to be on the move. Now you never know where the next challenge comes from, silently and very fast. Everywhere now the scramble is on. Everywhere now it's a mad race. But it's very hard when there is still so much to lose. When you have spent so much time, effort, and resources getting to where you are and making what you have, it's hard to believe that the empire is slipping away, that it's crumbling to dust. You want to believe that you will soon see the green shoots of recovery, that the good times are coming back soon. It's a classic case of an old empire in decline. Auden's poem sets us thinking. If we are to survive as anything more than an empty shell, an empire in decline, we need to find new ways of thinking. Let's now take a quick look at the biographical details of the poet as well as the background of the poem. This will help us understand the poem better and develop a greater insight into what the poem means. Wystan Hugh Auden was born in 1907. Auden traced his love of music and language partly to the church services of his childhood. Until he was 15, he was expected to become a mining engineer, but his passion for words had already begun. At Oxford, he formed lifelong friendships with two fellow writers, Stephen Spender and Christopher Isherwood. As a young man, he was greatly influenced by the Old English verse as well as the poetry of Thomas Hardy, Robert Frost, William Blake, Emily Dickinson, Gerald Manley Hopkins, and a few others. Auden has been greatly admired for his unsurpassed technical virtuosity. Moreover, he had a great ability to write poems in nearly every imaginable verse form. Auden incorporates in his work popular culture, current events, and colloquial speech. Moreover, he is greatly respected for the vast range of his intellect. He drew very easily from an extraordinarily vast range of literatures, art forms, social and political theories, scientific and technological information, and many other areas. His poetry frequently recounts, literally or figuratively, a journey or a quest, and his travels provided rich material for his verse. He visited Germany, Iceland, China, and many other countries. He served in the Spanish Civil War. In 1939, he moved to the United States of America. There, he met his lover Chester Kalman, and he became an American citizen. His own beliefs changed radically between his youthful career in England. At that time, he was an ardent advocate of socialism and Freudian psychoanalysis. In his later phase in America, Auden's central preoccupation became Christianity and the theology of modern Protestant faith. Auden was a prolific writer. Besides being a noted poet, he was also a playwright, a librettist, an editor, as well as an essayist. He is generally considered the greatest poet of the 20th century. His work has exerted a major influence on succeeding generations of poets on both sides of the Atlantic. Auden's stature in modern literature has been disputed. Opinions range from that of a critic who called him a complete washout to Joseph Brodsky, who praised him as the greatest mind of the 20th century. Auden's popularity and familiarity suddenly increased after his poem Funeral Blues, or in other words, Stop All the Clocks, was read aloud in the film Four Weddings and a Funeral in the year 1994. After 11 September 2001, his poem September 1, 1939 was widely circulated and frequently broadcast. Public readings and broadcast tributes, both in the UK and in the US, marked his centenary year 2007. Let's now briefly summarize the poem. Summarizing the poem gives us an overview of what the poem is all about before we move on into a greater and deeper critical appreciation of the poem. The speaker of the poem here is an omniscient narrator. He clearly knows what is happening both in the fallen Romanian city and how peaceful it is miles and miles away. The poem depicts an emotion of distress and sadness. A city is falling apart. Soon there will be an end to the great city. One of the themes here is the fragmentation of life in the city. Each segment of city life is isolated. It's oblivious to the others. Nobody knows what is happening to another. The temple prostitutes and the literati each seek their own mode of distraction. Religion, sex, poetry, they have all been debased. The city's military protectors, forgotten by a decadent society have no use at all for classical traditions of virtue. The central of the 7 stanzas is concerned with intellectual Cato, who is engaged with the past, with the ancient disciplines. And this is contrasted with the Marines, who mutiny for food and pay. It's interesting to note here that these Marines are muzzled and therefore evocative of Greek heroes, but they are only engaged in the mundane task of fighting for something as ordinary as food and pay. The ruler's bed is warm, and here again there is a reference to the past with the name of Caesar being mentioned. But the bed is warm not so much from sensual passion as from mere sloth, or perhaps in ordinary terms, laziness. While he sleeps late, the poor office worker labors on, because the office worker is trapped in an impotence that only bureaucracy can inflict. People are in discord, and there is existence of different classes of people: the rich, the middle class, and the poor low class. There is also an interesting image of expensive gowns. This is used to represent the wealthy class who are separated from the poor class. This is in contrast to what we see in nature. There is an image of little birds with scarlet legs who seem to mind their own business, nursing their eggs, watching the ruined city that is flu infected. Elsewhere, there is freedom, represented by a vast herd of reindeer moving silently and very fast. The reindeer may seem as ominous, but definitely not negative. They do not threaten the city. They are totally unconcerned with our world. The way nature carries on could be distressing because of its indifference to human tragedy. At the same time, this image of nature is also very comforting in an unsentimental way. It's comforting because of its beauty and because it asserts the fact that all human nastiness, all human evil can never completely destroy nature. Nature is lasting. The last stanza, with its reminder that there is a greater world beyond the confines of the human world, which is very putatively organized and civilized by man, reverberates with a sense of the truth that there is a world beyond the human being, and that this world is real and lasting. The Fall of Rome by W.H. Auden. The piers are pummeled by the waves. In a lonely field, the rain lashes an abandoned train. Outlaws fill the mountain caves. Fantastic grow the evening gowns. Agents of the fisc pursue absconding tax defaulters through the sewers of provincial towns. Private rites of magic send the temple prostitutes to sleep. All the literati keep an imaginary friend. Cerebrotonic Cato may extol the ancient disciplines, but the muzzle-bound Marines mutiny for food and pay. Caesar's double bed is warm. As an unimportant clerk writes, I do not like my work on a pink official form. Unendowed with wealth or pity, little birds with scarlet legs sitting on their speckled eggs, I each flu-infected city. Altogether elsewhere, vast herds of reindeer move across miles and miles of golden moss silently and very fast. Now let's move on to discuss the form and poetic devices that Auden employed in this poem. The Fall of Rome is a poem that is so beautifully crafted that the craftsmanship is quite hidden. It's very subtle. It is not obvious or on the surface for us to see. It reads effortlessly because the poetic devices that are used are unobtrusive. There is minimal alliteration. Let's take, for example, alliteration in phrases like Piers or Pummel or the muzzle-bound marine's mutiny. These alliterations slot in without being paraded. They slot in a very subtle manner. Another interesting aspect of the poem is that the poem constantly switches scenes. It does not meditate on a single scene. There are images that are juxtaposed. They build up a sense of absurdity and corruption. There is a pattern to the change of scenes. We begin on the outskirts of the city, zoom in towards the center, that is the bowels of the city, then pan out again. Finally, we are taken altogether elsewhere. The relationship of this completely other place to the city seems crucial to the poem's meaning. The last stanza of the poem is beautifully evocative with its opening line, altogether elsewhere. This creates a glorious image of northern desolation. This is far removed from Rome, the city that is falling. And there, in the altogether elsewhere, herds of reindeer do what they have always done and will continue to do so, irrespective of whether empires fall, empires rise, or empires crumble to mere dust. These reindeer move across miles and miles of golden moss silently, very fast. This image has an elemental beauty and a wonderful power that is beyond human beings. In fact, every stanza in the poem is image packed, making every line powerfully visual. Auden uses a number of adjectives, but they do not seem superfluous anywhere. Let's take, for example, phrases like a lonely field, an abandoned train, absconding tax defaulters, private rites of magic, an imaginary friend, an unimportant clerk, a pink official form, or finally, those little birds with their scarlet legs and speckled eggs. All these images are beautifully evocative, and the adjectives fall into place in a manner that suggests the meaning and also drives home the point of the entire poem. As in the best of Auden, content, even in this poem, The Fall of Rome, cannot be separated from the style of the poem. The poem has 7 stanzas, with each stanza being a quatrain of 4 lines. The rhyme scheme is ABBA. This rhyme scheme allows each scene to cohere at the center and then ripple away to an unexpected relationship with the opening line. Very strikingly, Auden uses enjambments. An enjambment is a continuation of a phrase across a line boundary. That is, phrases flow on from one line into the other. And this assures us right away that Auden avoids a sing-song rhythm that would have made the poem sound very artificial. That does not happen here. The first stanza captures our attention and imagination with the lines. In a lonely field, the rain lashes an abandoned train. This tempo is sustained until the very last stanza. There are also several examples of anachronisms and juxtapositions. Anachronisms are phrases or expressions that do not go with one particular time, but rather refer to another time. And juxtaposition is a placing side by side of two different things. And throughout, they conjure very economically a rich sense of the diversity of life, time, and place. And all these things apply to various aspects of the poem. It is very interesting to note that the poem Fall of Rome met with a lot of interesting critical comment. The Fall of Rome transcends both the eras, ancient Rome and post-war America. It presents one fused vision of a civilization in decline. The sheer mundane quality of details selected by Auden is remarkable. There is no melodrama at all. Any melodrama that could have been there is very swiftly undercut by the mundane, perhaps even the pathetic. In this Rome, tax defaulters consume the state's attention. This happens in any modern city. Entrenched labor grievances compromise the Marines. The Marines, who perhaps, like Greek heroes, would have been doing grand things, but no, they are not able to do that because they are caught up in trying to fight for their food and pay. The city is threatened not by the outbreak of another plague, but by flu. To someone today, flu does not seem like such a threateningly dangerous disease, but to someone of Auden's generation, the influenza was not a minor illness that we think of today. The 1918 epidemic was horrific and unimaginably destructive. Here again, we could probably look at the poet's opinion that poor writing can often be attributed to a disregard to one's audience. This opinion of the poet is expressed in the lines, "All the literati keep an imaginary friend." Auden here perhaps implies that the audience is imaginary and not real. And if a poet's audience is imaginary, then definitely it perhaps shows a disregard to the poet's audience. At the same time, the reader cannot help smiling at the all too recognizable image of an unimportant clerk who writes, "I do not like my work," on a pink official form. This is an image that most office workers today identify with. Auden is one of the few 20th century poets who are so attuned to the discord between our personal and professional lives. Most people today are caught up in a predicament where they do not know whether their everyday work satisfies them personally at a deeper level. In this poem, Auden is at his sardonic best. One part of his greatness was that he provided for us the human spirit's necessary response to much of the 20th century evil, the alienation, the banal violence, the destruction of nature, everything that we see all around us today. Elsewhere, his voice may be ironic. It may have come out in a cry of outrage, but in this poem, the tone is very detached. The poem could easily have been a very pedantic comparison between ancient Rome and 20th century America, especially with specific references like the Marines. But somehow, Auden manages to maintain the universality of the poem, and that is the lasting appeal of the poem. The poem is about the fall of Rome. Auden, with his mixture of modern and ancient references, writing in 1947, suggests a definitely modern parallel. The decline and fall of Rome could perhaps prefigure the decline of all human civilizations. The birds, without pity, eyeing the flu-infected city, are watching the end of civilization, and they are doing this sitting at a safe distance and without any pity, because nature is indifferent to man's plight. Plague, influenza, illness, all these are rife, and several other illnesses that Auden has not listed here. They are found everywhere, leading mankind to destruction, slowly, and perhaps mankind coming to an end. However, the last stanza does sound very hopeful. Auden does not end this poem on a note of doom. He rather ends the poem on a hopeful note. The herds of swiftly moving reindeer that can be seen there is perhaps a positive image, but there are some who would perhaps look upon it as a swift arrival of the next ice age. That depends on how one would choose to interpret it. For those empires, those who want to survive, endure, be part of the future, there is very little time to be wistful or angry at how things have turned out. In fact, they have no time at all. They were great days, but those days are gone. There may have been too many overwhelming forces, and there may yet be too many forces to stave off the inevitable. There is a lot of uncertainty about what's next, whether there's anything we can do, and whether we can make any informed guesses about the characteristics and capabilities of those civilizations most likely to find renewal, to reinvent, to sustain, and to rebuild for the years ahead. Auden does not offer any solutions, but he certainly sets us thinking. He wants us to think about one thing that is certain. No solutions can be found through legacy thinking. We cannot fall back on the same age-old mindset to help us survive. Survivors will only be those who face up to how the world is, not as what they might want it to be, and who are determined to secure a future in that new world. It's that kind of transformational thinking that we need today. It is that kind of new thinking that can bring in true critical analysis. And we need to start thinking about being ready to move into that space in the future. New futures can certainly emerge through all the despair, all the loss, the uncertainties that surround us. The paths to the future are made. They are not found. They are not given to us ready-made. We need to make them. And the process of making them changes both us and also changes our final destination. Despite all that's happened and all that's still happening all around us today, the fate of our species, the fate of our world lies with us. Only with us. It depends on our understanding, our insight, and our wisdom, and how well we can work together. Our future can be determined only by us. Auden said, "Poetry makes nothing happen." Yet, in subtle ways, his works undercut that claim. His poetry certainly does make something happen. It makes us think, and think in the right direction. I hope you have all enjoyed doing this poem. Perhaps that will motivate you to read a few other of Auden's poems. See you all in the next class. Thank you.